welcome to a special edition of the Pro Dental Podcast. I'm James Cooke, and today we're joined by Alex O'Neill. He's the Head of Compliance at Agilio Software, which has just released iComply NextGen that builds upon its existing iComply system. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to, really excited to meet with you and have a chat about it.
Well, it's great to have you. Now, let's begin by, if you could perhaps tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about yourself and your role at Agilio.
Yeah, where should I start? I come from a family of dentists. I'm pretty much the only non-clinical person probably in the family. I don't know how many practices there are now in the extended family. So I kind of grew up in the family practice, working my way through most non-clinical roles, and even back then you didn't need a GDC registration to nurse, so I did bits of nursing as well. Then I moved on into after doing a degree and master's degree in management, I moved on to practice management and background sort of operations and compliance management for practices and groups, and consultancy as well. And then I ended up with Code that's now Agilio.
Oh, that's incredible. So dentistry is really in your blood then. It's not just an arbitrary industry sector that you chose to get into.
No, it's one of those things. It's also sort of osmosis over the family dinner table through years of being there. I've now been here for 8 years at Agilio Software. So my role here is the head of compliance, where I sort of lead the teams on compliance research, consultancy, developing solutions for practices, just to sort of make the whole management compliance management process easier.
So for anybody listening or watching that hasn't come across Agilio Software yet, what is Agilio Software all about? What do you guys do?
It's a good question. I mean, Agilio, we're formerly Code and Isofarm, which are two, I'd almost say, household names in dentistry. Code on the compliance side and the HR side, and on the CPD side, obviously Isofarm, with the Isofarm CPD platform, which is now iLearn. So as a business, we're bringing together all that excellence, and we are the dental division of the business. So as a wider business, we also have they've acquired the best compliance providers in medicine as well, and we're all about sort of efficient, safe, effective healthcare, and excellence in operations and compliance, just allowing practices to save time, save money, focus on the patients, and have the systems in place to manage as efficiently as possible.
Oh, okay, incredible. So obviously we're here today to talk about iComply NextGen, which is Agilio Software's latest release. Now, I know that builds upon iComply, which is a pre-existing system. So perhaps the best way we can go about it is perhaps if we go back and talk a little bit about iComply, and for those who aren't familiar, what it entails, how it works.
I think that's a great start, actually. As a company, we've been around for 40 years. So we've got this knowledge, this expertise, and we've helped thousands of practices through inspections and of different types over the years of the lifetime of the company. And iComply as a product has been evolving for 20 years. So the product, we have some documents, policy, procedure templates in the system right now that the first version was written 20 odd years ago in the system. So it's a constant evolutionary process, and we're learning as we go. So iComply originally, back in the day, started life as an operational excellence system, paper-based system, because no one had a computer back then. 20 years ago, hardly any practices had computers like they have now. And the idea was to have a set of policies and procedures that helped you run a good business. Because one thing a lot of our clients have said to us, and a lot of the principals I've worked with over the years, is no one taught me how to run a practice. I learned when I was in dental school, I was taught how to be a clinician, and now I've got my own practice. So can you help us? So that's where people were coming to us as an organization and saying, what do I need to do? And then over years, 2006, we had the NHS contract that added a duty for practices to do clinical governance. So the product morphed into a clinical governance system back then. And then when the CQC came around in 2010, it became iComply. That's when it was sort of branded, and it became iComply, which was a manual system back then. And in 2013, we launched iComply as a software, as a system to help people get through compliance. And then 2015, we did a major revision to the software, and 2017, we did another revision, but a minor one. So the 2015 revision is probably the most important one, which is most significant to talking about what we're doing with NextGen, is that in 2015, the CQC released, well, not the CQC, the government released the fundamental standards, the Health and Social Care Act 2008 fundamental standards. 2010 to 2015, when the CQC were regulating a lot of the time, they were hitting brick walls, and the feedback that was given about the CQC is it can't regulate unless these things are laws. So what happened was this all became law, and then overnight, so from sort of the 31st of March 2014, overnight to the 1st of April, what our data showed us was that as a profession, we went from a sort of a 99%, 98% pass rate on CQC inspections to a 80% pass rate. So 1 in 5 practices started failing because these standards were very different to what we'd seen before, and the inspections completely changed. So the inspectors that we had coming to us from 2015 onwards really understood dentistry, really understood what they were working for. Prior to that, it felt a lot like the inspectors that we got had come across more from the care home side of things, and they didn't necessarily have the expertise. So as a profession, in 2015, there was a massive need for a system that helped to meet these standards. And the standards were very much quality assurance based. The CQC wanted to see, and the standards required that practices were doing quality assurance. They were showing continuous improvement. And that's where our software really made the difference, because we as an organization, and I think this is maybe where we differ from other organizations, we've always been very research led. So when the CQC were putting out their consultation documents in 2014, we were reading them all, we were engaging with the consultations, we were trying to influence the future and the shape of compliance management and regulation as best we could. And then we designed the system to, and the marketing and the messaging that we had at that time was, iComply tells you what to do, how to do it, gives you the documents to do it, tells you where to file it. It was a system that was belt and braces in that way, because the profession really needed that help, because 20% of the profession weren't understanding it. And what we had at that time was our practices had a 98% pass rate. So we were almost 20% higher than the average in the profession. And that's why we grew so rapidly. And we've got, I think it's around 2,300 practices, and we're aiming to hit way beyond 2,500 this year. And I'd say the other thing about iComply is coming from that way. iComply as a system, the scope of the system was to tell people what to do, how to do it, hold their hand doing it, explains to them what they need to do to get through that inspection. And that also included employment law. So the scope of the system was not just passing your CQC or HIW inspection. The scope of the system was, if you get inspected by anyone who can inspect a dental business or looks at you, you should have no problem if you follow our system. That was the scope. So we've got a lot of employment law, contract templates, disciplinary policies and procedures, and we helped everyone with that. And I'll talk about this more. And part of the job that we'll be doing now is to rescope the system based on what our members really, really want and what inspectors are looking for in 2022.
Well, that leads us nicely into my next question. You've just touched upon it slightly there, but tell us a little bit more about how iComply NextGen builds upon iComply.
I think a good way to talk about this is to talk about the journey that we've been on and where we came from. So as an organization, we are always listening to our members, and we're always wanting to improve. There's no such thing as bad feedback. And we always want the system to be the best, most efficient system. Most of us come from practice management, and my team is full of practice managers, and we want this to be the system that we needed when we were in practice. So that's kind of always where we're coming from with it, and we want that real-time feedback from our members. So our 2,300 members are calling us every day, and they're giving us suggestions. So we have a whole list of suggestions there. But then there are other things going on. We always do an annual survey of our members. So we did an annual survey. I think it was the tail end of of 2020, and we do one 2019, and we asked a comprehensive survey of our members. What do you like about the system? What would you like us to improve? Going into every feature, it was great. It was the engagement was fantastic, and that people took the time to fill that out because it was a very comprehensive survey. So we took the information from that survey, and we then invested heavily in qualitative researchers. We ran focus groups. So we really wanted to understand what our members wanted, but we really wanted to understand the nuance of it, because it's very simple for someone to say, I'd like something to be more simple, or I'd like something to be easier to use, or I'd like something to be more curated. And but to really get what people want, we wanted to not assume that we understood what people were asking for in the system and what they needed. So we did all of that research. Then what we've also got going on is we're constantly looking at consultation documents. We're researching inspection reports. We've looked at as a team over 3,000 CQC inspection reports, and I've personally read something like 1,500 to 2,000 now. So we're always, and we do that regularly. So we're always looking at that. Obviously, there's other forces going on with the pandemic, and what we've seen is practices just have less time. To be honest, what they really want is to focus on, how do I get through my inspection? How do I get through my inspection? How do I make sure I'm inspection ready? And I'm having a safe practice for my team and for my patients. Additionally, what we also noticed was that the regulators themselves are evolving and learning, and they're refining the list of what they feel is important as well. So all of this came together for us to then really look at the system again. And as I said earlier, we came from a background of HR, operations, compliance. If you got inspected by anybody, you should be fine. But what our members really were saying, and what the profession really wants, is a system that gives them choice and allows them to decide whether or not they want to do the CQC HIW compliance. They want to do the optional compliance, the best practice. They want to do the operational stuff. They want to have a grievance and disciplinary procedure signed by their members. So that was kind of the process that we went through, and we analysed every single thing in iComply, every single activity. And we gave them priority ratings, and I don't know how much I should go into that right now, or if that'll be in another question, but we gave them priority ratings, we gave them classifications, and a lot of UI features that are going to help members with that.
That sounds fantastic. Could you elaborate a little bit more on those priority ratings for us?
Yeah, I think what we've done is we went on an exercise to look at everything in iComply, and every document and every activity and everything that people are being asked to do. Guidance and regulations aren't always super clear on what evidence you need to supply to meet a regulation. They just say you need to show that you're doing this. And the regulators themselves have actually evolved from a position where they used to come into practice and be like, show us your policy or show us this document. And that was the burden of proof. And as regulators have evolved, this is what we've seen, as regulators have evolved and learned, and as a profession, compliance profession and support profession has learned, that they're more going into practices these days, and they're saying, instead of show us your document, show us what you do. Explain to us what you do. So they're more interested in that. And but you still do have to have certain documents. So we looked at everything in iComply, and we looked at every document and every activity, and we said, is there a legal reason to produce this? Do you need this? Do you have to have it to pass? If you don't have it, and then we tied that with inspection data as well. And we said, like, if you don't have it, could an inspector say that you're breaching a regulation? So we looked at that, and then the activities in iComply, we assigned them one of three categories. The first one is compliance, and that means if you don't have this, you could probably breach on your inspection. So that's the compliance category. You then have your optional category, which is there's multiple facets to it, but generally speaking, the optional things are a couple of best practice things, and a couple of best practice things, but other things like, if not every practice does sedation. So if you do sedation, if we put sedation in everyone's calendar, they're going to say, why is it here? So your optional compliance is, if you do this thing that requires compliance, it's there for your calendar. And then your operational Your operational is things like your HR management, your best practice management, your operational excellence, your opening and closing practice checklists, your grievance disciplinary procedures, your job descriptions, things that legally you don't have to have, but as a business, it's a very good idea to have. So that's one of the major changes is the system, as before we used to say to people, because the scope of the system was not just CQC and HIW inspection, it was also tribunal protection, to make sure that if you ever went to a tribunal, or if anyone ever tried to say that you weren't meeting employment law, you were completely covered. So those are sort of like major changes. On top of that as well, as I said, with the categorizing activities on whether they're mandatory or whether they are, whether they're compliance, mandatory compliance, or they're optional or operational. A really good example of that would be the clinical records auditing. So clinical records auditing is not mandatory in England. It's highly advisable because you'd rather have an inspector look at your clinical records audit than go through your clinical records, but there's no legal requirement for it. Whereas in HIW in Wales, the private dentistry regulation 16 requires clinical records auditing. So we've downgraded the clinical records audit in the system to optional for England, but we've maintained the mandatory compliance for Wales. We've introduced the priority system, which I probably should have said. So for any of the compliance activities, and this is a key thing, for any of the compliance activities, they have a priority next to them of either high, medium, or low. Now, what that means is we base this on looking at inspection reports and how likely not doing that job. All of them are compliance jobs, which compliance is basically meeting legal minimums or having evidence that you're meeting minimums. So you need to do them. But if you're a practice manager who's short on time, you're probably best focusing on something like your annual sedation audit and compliance, or your annual sedation audit compliance, or your health and safety risk assessment review, rather than doing your no smoking policy update. So it's to help practices who are short on time prioritize what they need to do in the time that they have. And we base that on weighting, and we're keeping that under regular review. And also, the last point I'd say is we've overhauled the user interface. What we wanted to do was make sure it was really clean and crisp for users, and less clicks, less clicks to get the same job done. So we've done a lot of work on improving the user interface, making it slicker, faster, easier to read. And some of my personal favorite changes in that are that the monthly list of compliance activities you get on a calendar, you can now switch it to a list view. So you'll get a list view, and it's got all the priorities there in colors, and you can filter out. So if you don't want to see your medium or low or optional or operational for this month, if you're a practice manager who's super short on time that day, and you're like, I just want to get 2 high rated activities, high priority activities done, you can just click, sort your calendar out, and just go and do those. So it's just giving that power, that choice, that control to the practice manager. So the old system held your hand because in 2015 it needed to, and the profession needed that help, in our opinion. Whereas in 2022, we've learned as a profession, and practice managers know what the evidence is required, and the system's giving them that control and that choice to choose what they do and prioritize what they want.
Fantastic. So anybody listening or watching that wants to find out a bit more, is there anywhere they can go to find out? And is there anything else you would add just before we wrap things up here?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're going to be emailing this out to our mailing list, so there'll be information out there. They can go to the website, which is agiliosoftware.com. We'll have it all over our social media, on LinkedIn and on the Facebook pages as well. And obviously, if anyone's interested, they can just give us a call. We're on 01409 254 354. You can always give us a call and just ask to have a chat about the system, what we're doing. We're always happy to have a talk to anyone, members or non-members, about what we do and how we do it.
That's terrific. Well, for anybody listening and watching, we will include those links in the episode description, so you can find those above or below. But no, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you.